Welcome to the Augmented Society Network. We explore, collaborate and reflect on the future of human interaction with technology. Jonathan, over to you for today's topic.
Thank you. So today's topic, we came up with the title of Greta v. Gates. Can environment and technology coexist? And while the battle participants are merely a form of playful event title, there's nothing playful about the impacts of our two largest driving concerns in the 21st century. Greta Thunberg comes by way of environment to influence technology and society, and Bill Gates made his fortune in technology, yet is attempting to enhance environment and society through the Gates Foundation, with the long-term effects of both still very much in question. When technology development calls for constant iteration and throwaway elements, can technology and the environment ever truly live in harmony? Whether you believe the global warming we are currently seeing as a direct result of our activities or not, we use technology in a way that increases the planet temperatures, and with few massive drives to reduce its impact, success is still being measured in GDP. We've decreased feasible product lifetimes in technology for purposes both practical and capital, leading to a nation-sized wasteland of tech byproduct cast-offs, and our amazing travel and entertainment experiences come at such a cost that attempts to be carbon neutral are laughable at best. In a time when we are enabling machines to make our decisions and control our environment, are we seeing any glimmers of hope that machines can pick up the ball that humanity has dropped for decades? And is the toll on the environment rising too quickly? And if so, are there any developments we should know about that will stem the tide? Just in the last week, there's been tremendous pieces that have come into play, whether it's further talk about Greta Thunberg with the fact that a biography is coming out, or the fact that Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, just came out with $1 billion Bezos Earth Fund. So this is definitely on the tip of everybody's tongues, and we're just seeing a whole bunch of development that's happening. And not to mention the Midlands in the UK, where there's massive flooding, causing a lot of people to not only have to leave their homes, but perhaps lose their home. What we were hoping to do today is find out where doing good fits in relationship to technology and our planet. I'm really excited about seeing if there's any examples of breakthroughs where technology and the environment is not a zero-sum endeavor. Hopefully, at the end of this, we can take opportunities where the Augmented Society Network might be able to take a worthwhile position in driving awareness, positive turns, so that technology and the environment are no longer two opposing sides of a coin. It just reaches into everything. It reaches into business development, entire industries, politics, the food that we eat. It touches everything. And I think it is, unfortunately, too often put off to the side.
The two people that we used in our title, so Bill Gates and Greta Thunberg. I've been doing some research on, how they've been received, what they've done and who they are as people, putting those two people together, which is, I'm not sure the right thing to do, because it's way too early in Greta's career and way too late in Bill's to be like.
He doesn't want to hear that.
No. So I just had a quick look at where they've kind of come from. Greta, a very young woman, I think she's 16, started the Fridays for Future, which was her way of holding up climate change as a very serious issue. She has put a hard stare on capitalism and the way that we develop technologies and the seriousness of our situation. Her concerns are green and environmental at their heart. She has been recognised by many organisations. She's also been used and abused in terms of her message. I noted, though, that she was Time magazine's Person of the Year. She's won the Nobel Peace Prize, and she's on Forbes 100's Most Powerful Women. So she is, without doubt, an established voice and face of a disastrous future, and one that's being held by a 16-year-old, which is quite a new way for us, I think, to deal with things. I think we're used to the philanthropist being towards the end of the career, or the agitators being in very different camps. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So after an extensive career of Microsoft, which is debatable in terms of how valuable that has been, but it's certainly been the bedrock of business communication and technology for many, many years. I remember a small campaign in the 90s actually about suing for the amount of time we'd lost by having to use Microsoft Windows as an operating system, and if we could just have back those years. But anyway, in later life, he's clearly set up the foundation, and the foundation works in 5 different areas. It's more of a human representation, if you like, concerning itself with health, development of health products, growth and opportunity. It does work globally, but it equally has a footprint in the United States, where it works within schools. And it has a global policy and advocacy element to it. So it's much broader, it's much more mature in terms of its impact. While it does have a concern for green issues, it's much more about empowering the world's poor to have an equal place in society. So the caption they have is all lives have equal value. So I see those two people as slightly different. So we're looking at different aspects of their lives, but I think the thing that interests us most are their reactions to humankind having a sustainable place on this planet, which is the way I've kind of done some research into what we're going to talk about today. So that's kind of what I'm hanging stuff on. Mitch, I'm not sure what your considered angle is, or if you're waiting to hear something that will bring you into the conversation. What have you been thinking about?
Well, I've a lot of different angles, and you touched on a lot of them. One is that you get somebody like Greta, who's a young person who has managed through social media to build a tremendous amount of influence. And everybody is looking at this young person, looking at her kind of as an underdog. That causes a lot of people to say, wow, isn't that great, to identify with her and to further build her network. And then I'm also thinking, like, well, let's look a few years ahead. What are the chances that everything that she continues to do for the next 2 or 3 years fits in with all of our thoughts about what is right and what is not, versus what if she takes normal steps for a teenager and she does some missteps? Is everything that she's done going to go by the wayside? Is everybody going to say, oh, gee, she was a fake, or she was this, or she was that? And there's a tremendous amount of expectations on her. And then I think of Bill Gates, and Bill Gates, to me, is emblematic of people who also have had skill, but luck to build these enormous fortunes. A number of people who have built these fortunes now want to use those fortunes to influence the way the world turns out. Whether we like it or not, whether we agree with the specific things that they're doing or not, they're there. And then the question is, how can we influence them to move in directions that we all might want? That when we disagree with them. The Gates Foundation, they have to make, pulling the number a little bit out of the air, but they have to make $75 million, $100 million decisions on where they put their money. They don't want to make $500,000 decisions. They have too much money to think in those terms. On the other hand, things like $25,000 to help a school do something, $1,500 to help a teacher reach 100 kids. I mean, those are real needs that we have, and could do a tremendous amount of good if we multiply those by thousands. But those are not within what Gates is trying to do. Gates is looking for these moonshots where they can make one decision for $100 million and know that that $100 million is going to go for that particular purpose. And that really limits the types of things that they can do. So I don't know if that...
Besides the fact that you've sort of just carved out a little space for you to be in as a clearinghouse for educational opportunity. Hey, Gates Foundation, why don't you give me that 100 million and then I can help in dispersing? I think it's really interesting because with whether we're talking about Greta or Gates, or even if there's a clearinghouse for doing those smaller pieces, there's so much politicization.
Right.
You brought up about social and what Greta has been able to utilize social for. BBC just published this past week some research where 25% of tweets on climate change are from bots. Okay. So If one person controls a lot of those bots, forget about it. Now, 38% of the notes that go out on Twitter, and this is just looking at Twitter, 38% of those that speak of fake science, no global warming, this, we should just be going business as usual. 38% of those are bots. So, and then when then you take it to when the Trump administration exited the Paris Agreement, these bots were doing about 100, maybe hundreds of tweets per day, and it ballooned to 25,000 per day. In an instant, you can all of a sudden glut the communication with things that we don't know if it's control. We're just assuming that it's controlled by a few agents. The interesting thing is when you look at 25,000 per day, they realized that after the Paris Agreement, there was so much conversation that 25,000 tweets per day only counted for 13% of the full communication. So when people are active, from this I took, there's active conversation. When it is front of mind, you're going to get more real communication. When it is just something that's in the background that could influence how people feel or how things are politicized, it's a huge amount of number that's bots. Whether it's, Mitch, to your point, whether it's tweeting stuff that we agree with or disagree with, it's still all this stuff that's controlled by others or individuals. And that to me is a scary thing, because so much of it is relying on, now that everybody has found this new voice called the internet, in ways that we never dreamed of utilizing our voices before. It's so skewered.
Right. I look at my online news source, and I don't know if it's New York Times or if it was Apple News or whatever, but it's the headline is CDC predicts pandemic of coronavirus flu in the U.S. and what you should do about it. Okay.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. My wife goes to exercise class today, and there's two women in her class. Well, there's a bunch of people, but there's two women in her class who are in their 30s who are freaking out because they're amassing food, and what are they going to do? Because, should they be allowing their kids to go to school? What should they be doing now? And to somebody in their 60s looking at that, it's like, we've had scares all the time. We seem to inflame this tremendous fear in people.
Oh, yeah. Fear sells.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
The internet itself is obviously the platform on which all of this is happening. A lot of this concerns the future of our planet, the future of our ability to inhabit this planet. According to the ICT Consumer Report, the global internet industry was 7% of the world's usage of electricity. So it's also the platform, it's eating up our resources. And they predict that by 2050, the internet will use 20% of the world's available electricity. So
in what year was that? That'll be 20%?
50.
Wow.
They expect it to eat up 20% of the world's available electricity. Now, the percentages of where that electricity is also coming from is a frightening thing too, because a lot of that is coal, but I'll come back to that. So this platform that is enabling us to operate in fear, in being able to pass all of these incorrect messages or, ways to hunker down and to avoid things, is eating us up at the same time. Now, I know it's a bit left field on where we were on the coronavirus, but it's a kind of virus of its own in the way that it's eating everything.
I would question whether we're just talking about the internet or if we're talking about that 20% by 2050 includes IoT.
Yeah, devices are about 47%.
Okay, so those are the little things that are telling us that the AC is maybe too high, so we should turn that down, or things like that are helpful on the flip side to our environment,
yes.
Right?
How do you determine what the temperature is today? Do you go outside and say, oh, it's warm? Or do you look on your phone, say, what's the temperature, which is, sending all these impulses just to Google or Apple or somebody who then is sending it back to you and say, oh, it's 37 degrees in your neighborhood, or whatever it is.
And what you've just done has made it go up in another 10 years when you could have just walked out of the door. Actually, it's funny, my perception of temperature is completely shot. I've had to go back to Fahrenheit in the first place rather than centigrade. But in Vegas, 70 degrees Fahrenheit feels cold to me, which is what, 23 centigrade, something like that. If I take that back to London, I am suffering.
You're skewered for saying anything like that.
Yeah, we should be stepping outside of our doors and physically experiencing temperature, and then kind of decide for ourselves. But our very nature of picking up our mobile phones and looking for that input, has that not, just as we were discussing in our previous session, taken over? I'm not willing to go out now. And anyway, I might encounter something I don't want to encounter. We're building a world that enables us to stay inside.
But it's also a world that is creating technology. For instance, Mitch, I wouldn't look at my device to get temperature because the microclimate's just in west Los Angeles. It can vary by 5 degrees based on which block you're on. Until my phone has the ability to sense what is the temperature right here, or what is the temperature outside of this building, or things like that, which then leads to the point that we don't know when that development is going to come. We could assume that it might come. And it goes along with all of the other little developments that go into our mobile devices that are causing us to say, ooh, look at that new device that came out. I need to trash this old one and buy a new one, which that too is leading to the e-waste. When we used to buy Apple devices, laptop, whatever, you could open up the bottom of your Apple laptop and replace components. You can no longer do that. It used to be that with a bunch of, we talked about this before, with the TV, it lasted you forever. For the most part, TVs that people aren't even buying much of anymore do last a long time. But the fact that phones require you to buy every 2 years. And there are some players that are coming out, for instance, in a lot of, it's offered in a lot of the EU, a company called Fairphone, where everything is built with fair trade products. It's all modular. So you can very easily, if you were to drop it and break it, you could replace pieces instead of having to buy an entirely new phone. You could obviously upgrade different systems, whether it's your RAM, your storage, et cetera, et cetera. When are we going to start seeing more of that come into play?
Is it meal products or MIELE products, white goods as they might be referred to?
Or Mealy, is that how
Mealy.
The French, the German company?
Yeah, so they've always been built. I think that was part of their original plan, was to ensure that things were replaceable. There was an article, Wired magazine, on using cotton for throwaway t-shirts. And whilst cotton is a preferable fabric, it takes something like 2,700 litres of water to make a cotton t-shirt. So it's a very complicated message, I think, for us to break down and to be able to move forward with on a daily basis, which is where people like Greta, for example, help us to see where we can make those changes. The world of technology, the world that we live in, don't make it that easy for us to do that, because some of the statistics they might use might be a little debatable. Some of the things that we think we're doing that might be helping may actually not be helping at all, because it's having an impact somewhere else that we can't see, and that we're not being informed by the manufacturers of the product we've just put on, for example.
So we're being bombarded with so much information, right? So we talk about the internet providing that platform for information sharing, but there's so much of it. And how many people are then saying, you know what, screw it, I'm not going to worry about it. Organic foods, clothing, all that type of stuff, that's huge. But then when you start looking at what does it cost to produce, you know, forgetting consumables, you know, in the intro, we talk about there are artists that are, even though in the music industry, the way that artists are making most of their money is through touring, there are bands that are saying, I'm not touring anymore because of the carbon footprint that leaves behind. Maybe the internet is going to find that solution. I don't know, but there's so many, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, propositions put out there when we're talking about the environment.
So are we going to get further in improving that by relying on somebody like Bill Gates, or by relying on somebody like Greta Thunberg? Or are there other ways that are better?
I think while we have a huge role to play, I do believe government is in a good position to drive change.
Let's let Donald Trump then do it.
Will not be done.
I regret what I've just said, but to me, no matter what the political persuasion is, if we have a belief in science, all of the caveats have to come out now, Mitch, because yes, it's absolutely not a given. But if we can, actually what I'm going to say has just been utterly blown up, because we're not relying on science anymore, are we? We're relying on who shouts the loudest and what bot is most...
So when Trump appoints Pence to handle the coronavirus response in the US, what's the first thing that Pence does? He cut off all information. Any scientist or any person in the federal government is not allowed anymore to make any information that has anything to do with the coronavirus public unless it goes through their PR people. That is...
Okay, so...
Yeah, thanks for bringing a silent like a Paul over this thing.
Thanks, Mitch. Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Okay, so in normal times, government is well placed, but we're not in those normal times. To me,
I'm gonna blow up that whole thing about government, or that it is an either or equation. It has to be a partnership. It can't be a Greta versus Gates. It's got to be a Greta and Gates. It's got to
because
be
they're doing different things, and we need both.
we need both. And it's not just them. It's not like, as we all know, you can't just put a product in front of people and they're going to say, oh yeah, I'm going to take it. There is government that's out there, whether it's our government, whether it's the US government, UK, EU, whatever, that are putting out requirements that if an appliance manufacturer is going to put out something, they've got to provide the parts to fix that for at least 10 years, right? They can't force obsolete, like maybe some carriers have done previously.
Mm-hmm.
So like they're putting that out there, but the question is, if they then start skimping if those companies start skimping and say, well, we're going to Fisher Price our product because we have a name, we think we can sell it, and we'll say, oh, we're playing along and we're providing this, people are going to stop buying their product, right? If they're not going all the way, if they're not really performing. So in the same sense of when the Trump administration came in, and you had all of those auto manufacturing plants that were working, they were building structures that were LEED, silver, gold, whatever it was, so that they were environmentally sound. And then all of a sudden the administration rolled back requirements. Those auto manufacturers didn't say, oh, great, we're going to cut out that piece or this piece. They're like, we're just doing this anyway. And why? Because it makes good business sense. So it's, yes, to bring up the whole, if Pence is controlling communication as the same administration poo-poos China for their not sharing of information, then we're going to do the same thing. Like, that's just insanity. But in terms of,
he's making it more transparent. I'm just kidding.
I would think that was a bit of a disaster, but if we are, and this has been predicted for a long time, moving into a world where things like viruses or disasters or rising tides change where we live and force us to move elsewhere, then that has an immediate impact on supply chains. So your supply chain is no longer guaranteed, even with blockchain, AI, all of that guaranteeing that your tomato has not experienced temperatures over 23 degrees C by the time it reaches your shelf. These aspirations here that we have are fairly untenable if we're continuing to experience the world as we are currently. An incredible expectation that I don't think we can live up to.
Well, it's really cool that you brought that up, because there's an initiative called the Amazon Third Way Initiative, in partnership with the World Economic Forum. They're creating an Earth Bank of Codes. Okay, so this bank of codes effectively is an open global public good platform that tracks assets, provenance and rights and obligations, utilizing blockchain, AI, advanced sensors, IoT. So it's setting up the backbone, the infrastructure. So Zoe, those points when you're talking about supply chain, and what is the proper time to plant your seeds for the next yield of fruit, whatever it is. If we can have that open source, so we can really see and learn from each other, and it's not just the corporations or the countries that are controlling. We used to have that Farmer's Almanac. When they wrote the Farmer's Almanac, they weren't thinking about all these other environmental issues that because of technology we have to deal with, because of the fact that coronavirus didn't have the same scare when we were dealing with SARS 20 years ago, because people weren't traveling as much 20 years ago as they are now. When things change, things have to change. And I think that this Amazon Third Way initiative is really cool, because we wouldn't have thought about open source if it wasn't for the fact that in a lot of computer stuff, in a lot of application building, we haven't thought about open source.
And I think I've mentioned it before. It was interesting when IBM bought Red Hat, and that private corporations are beginning to eat up some of the open source just from a coding perspective. But what you're suggesting there is that the open source approach is the way forward. It's almost like almost feels more like the Greta way forward.
Yeah, we're all in this together.
Bill Gates also saying we're all in this together, and I have this fortune, so I have an obligation to make the world a better place.
Yes.
The USA has something like 3% of projects that are PP3, private-public partnerships.
Yeah.
In Europe, I think it's something like 30% of infrastructure projects are P3. That to me indicates a difficulty with moving some of these more kind of open source ways forward. when the ability to work together is, well, it's much harder, it seems to be, than it is to organise in Europe, whether it be down to the size of the country or the willingness to partake in public activity.
I might be naive in this. Isn't that part of culture? And the fact that European culture is that, in a way of doing business, that you look for these types of partnerships as an entity, you look for these government partnerships because that's where you're going to get your funding. Whereas in the case of the US, all funding has been jacked. It's been deferred to.
Yeah, but you can't get policy-based piece of funding in using the US political system because it's too short. The cycles are too short to enable
Jacked.
big
Right.
infrastructure projects
Exactly.
to establish themselves is what you're referring to as jacked.
Yes, no, the fact that there's so much emphasis placed on the private entities going and doing infrastructure. I mean, that's why I say if we really wanted 5G to take hold in the States, it needs to be that the government says we are going to do this. As long as they're relying on T-Mobile or AT&T or Verizon or Sprint or whatever, you're screwed because they're going to say, well, what's in it for us? Because if we're laying the infrastructure, we are required, via net neutrality, we are required to let everybody else use our backbone to then profit themselves. You don't have that argument if the government gets involved. There are many governments that are much further along in 5G because the government is saying, we're doing this. This is our infrastructure. This is what is going to help our citizen. In that respect, yeah, we're dealing with an issue that it is an administration that changes every 4, 8, or sometimes longer amount of years. And the fact that in our houses of Congress in the United States, you won't even pick up bills that have anything to do with environment if the Senate is run by Republicans.
So Mitch, going back to Bill Gates then, give me what you think that means.
Well, it means that he is going to determine through his organization how they're going to evaluate projects, what success should look like, which projects get funded, and that's going to skew things to his point of view. So you have this, and which isn't, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing or a good thing, is that he's got the resources and it's just going to happen. So when he thinks that small schools are the way to go, or he thinks that measuring student outcomes should be what's done in order to allow teachers to keep their jobs or provide funding to schools, he can fund that so that it gets tried. And some of those things are going to work and some of them aren't going to work. But somebody else may have better ideas, but his ideas are going to be the ones that get done because he's got $40 billion behind him or $70 billion behind him in his.
Whereas Greta clearly doesn't have that kind of money.
Greta's got the message.
Yeah.
Greta's got the message. Gates got the money. Come on, everybody, let's dance. Whatever. Any foundation, whether you talk about this Bezos Earth Fund that I mentioned in the open, that's now another $1 billion at play.
Well, Michael Bloomberg and his campaign, $400 million in TV ads in a month and a half.
Absolutely unbelievable. So things haven't really moved on then, have they? It's all late middle-aged men who are controlling the earth.
Right.
Looking at you. Sorry.
As I'm tired of being considered just the white middle-aged man, can we be a little bit more hopeful here and talk about some of the things that are coming up?
Right, but even that, it's not like it's bad or it's unhopeful. It's like, isn't that a better thing for him to put his money on than just buying a painting or just buying another house or something? He's trying to, I don't think that Bloomberg particularly wants to be president. He's willing to be, I personally think he's willing to be president because he thinks that you need somebody with capabilities similar to his, or could be another Democratic candidate, to change our systems in the country. I think that's, I may disagree with him on 60% of what he says, but I'd rather him try that than, buy another painting and just increase the value of paintings.
I agree, Mitch. Yeah, I'm being kind of flippant because it's us. But yeah,
we are.
I agree.
And just one point of clarification, I said Bezos, the Earth Fund is $1 billion. It's actually 10 billion.
Wow.
Which is a good amount of money to counterbalance the amount of CO2 that Amazon shipping puts into this
Right.
world.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
and talking CO2, has anybody heard of direct air capture?
No.
So direct air capture, think of it, it's still really new, but think of it as they're like artificial trees. So what they do is they're these big fan systems that take ambient air, and from that they're able to pull out the CO2. So they're able to separate the CO2 from the ambient air, put out the air, again, like what trees do, right? And then it's able to destroy, sort of direct that CO2 to where it might be either helpful, like utilized for production of something else, or just destroyed as opposed to stored, which is what we deal with now with carbon capture and storage. If these were done correctly, they could base a full-scale direct air capture, or DAC, would be able to take out the equivalent of 250,000 cars' annual CO2 emissions. Like, that's huge, right?
That is huge.
Yeah.
Right?
But then the flip side that they have to figure out is how much energy is required to do that, and how do you do that? And so, certainly you don't want to be taking coal or fossil fuels, because then you're talking zero sum, right? Which I guess is better than having too much CO2. I don't know. But one thing that I was thinking about, when I drive from Los Angeles to Las Vegas, on the 15, you pass that huge, huge field of solar arrays. The fact that solar arrays could be anywhere, and you're seeing them, certainly here in Southern California, you're seeing them covering car parks for high schools or for businesses. The VA in Los Angeles, their car park is covered with solar arrays. So the fact is we can be capturing all of this energy to then power the direct air capture. And if you were to have one of these DACs right next to the 405 North in Westwood, where the VA has their arrays, imagine how much could be done there.
And I know we've talked before about the desert here, the Mojave Desert, and in the middle of Nevada, nothing really lives. There's not much going on essentially there. People will contradict me, of course, but it's a perfect place for solar. Nevada could be using that solar power, but it's not. There is a company called Heliogen, which has developed a sensor that enables solar panels to move more accurately to reflect the sun. And there are a number of these in the Mojave Desert. The guy behind it is Bill Gross. They've managed to generate temperatures that would enable them to impact on the way concrete is produced. So they can create temperatures using solar to melt limestone, which is one of the key elements of concrete production. Concrete is one of our biggest building blocks, love it or hate it. This would enable us to have a new way of manufacturing it. They've also found ways to get up to, I think it's something like 2,700 degrees, which is the temperature required to create synthetic hydrogen. There are small but really powerful glimmers of hope in terms of disrupting the way that concrete or the concrete industry manufactures, which has got to be, as far as I'm concerned, a good thing. But equally, being able to produce synthetic hydrogen or other synthetic products that enable us to come off oil, coal, etc. One of the things I worry about a lot is the rise of the data center. We have Switch here in Nevada. So Switch are doing some great things here in terms of making data centers efficient. Something I didn't know was that Nevada, 70% of the time is 70 degrees. So actually it's an incredibly stable environment, as well as offering almost unlimited access to the sun. Data centers to me are some of the things that we need to concentrate on at the same time. But the glimmers of hope there are in totally new ways of manufacturing. Edge AI is a much simplified way of using artificial intelligence for voice control. So whereas most of the time the AI that you're using in terms of your Alexa or your Hey Google It's cloud-based. So it's basically growing the demand for a data center, because I want to be able to ask it who the president was in 1928. I don't need to ask a kettle that. Do I need to really ask a kettle those kinds of questions? No, I don't. Should I just get up and turn the kettle on? Probably. But if you look at Edge AI, it runs on much, much simpler neural networked numbering. And I think we have Windows, Microsoft, way over-spec'd for what we probably really needed it to do. And we have a propensity to overcomplicate everything that we do. I certainly do. So things like Edge AI, where actually that's sitting just on a small chip with some very minimal resources pinned to my kettle or my toaster, is definitely a way forward that enables us to reduce our reliance on those hideous data centers. You're absolutely right to bring up, there is a bright future here, and one where technology absolutely has to enable us to remain viable on this planet. And it isn't an and or not with technology. It's an absolute, to me, it's an absolute yes, of course it is, because it's our only way forward.
When you bring up AI, there's also Earth-friendly AI, which is along the same lines, right? So it's being able to use robotics, have robotic fish in the oceans, and the AI that doesn't have to communicate with the satellite, is able to look at all of the data that's around it as it's swimming around, or up in drones. You know, all these types of things that whether it's looking at ocean levels, whether it's looking at the sensors of methane that's happening in some parts of the world, any of those things, AI is being used. We talk about the different organizations. We've talked about foundations. I spoke about the Amazon Third Way initiative, but there's also the Stanford Woods Institute for the Environment. The thing that I like about that is it's smack dab in the middle of Silicon Valley. So they're looking at how can we utilize technology to better the environment, because it is, well, it's not an either or, it's an and but.
Greenpeace have released, what's it called? It's Who's Winning the Race to Build the Green Internet? And they're actually scoring companies in terms of their transparency, their use of coal, natural gas, and so on. So that idea of something being transparent is definitely growing. We mentioned it previously, just so as you know as well. Facebook scored A on the Clean Energy Index, whereas IBM, HP, Amazon Web Services scored a C. Interestingly, from your music perspective, iTunes was an A and Spotify was a D. So, there are, and that basically measures clean energy, natural gas, coal, nuclear, and how transparent the company is willing to be about their sources of
So going back to Mitch's point about Pence, he would score like a B because he was transparent, as opposed to China, which would score a D or an F. Is that what?
Well, in terms of natural gas, he would probably score highly too. Sorry. There are those glimmers basically of what we were talking about being sustainable. We are kind of running out of time now, so I wonder if we can kind of each take a turn to sum up where we are in this conversation.
You go first, Zoe. Or no, Mitch, you go just for.
I'm with the and that we need many, many different initiatives from many different sources. We can complain about so much information so much fake information being put out by the internet, and we can complain about our national governments in many nations now as not really moving us forward. But we're seeing positive movement in so many different places, or attempts at positive movement, and we need to encourage more of those. So when Bill Gates puts billions of dollars into trying to solve some huge problems, a lot of his solutions aren't going to work. When Greta Thunberg comes out and builds a community around a really bright vision of what we should be doing, or a dark vision about what we're doing, it's really easy to criticize her and say, but she's a 16-year-old kid. She doesn't understand physics. She doesn't understand this. But she's built this vision, and that's helping the wisdom of the world really move forward. And I see that as being unstoppable. People seeing that the world really needs to change for the better, and using their resources, whether they're social capital or their money or technology, in order to make those happen, not perfectly, but as best they can.
I think it is. I agree with that, and I think it's a lot of incremental. And everybody wants immediate response, like whole. There was this bad, and we want it completely gone. And as we know, that's just not possible. We've already spewed so much crap into the air; it ain't possible. But I'll give one more example. Formula One. They transport their cars all over the world for these races where they're using a lot of petroleum. You would think this is horrible for the environment, but they're doing some things. For instance, back in the day, they would bring their entire engineering team everywhere with them because they were constantly trying to work the physics to their benefit in the race. Now, their engineering team is able to stay in one place, design in one place with prototyping, with 3D printing, with whatever, send that to the team, to the crew at whatever racetrack they're at, and they're able to recreate with 3D printing. They can 3D print carbon for the body of their cars, things like that were unfathomable before. Mm-hmm. It's almost like we're in Star Trek where you've got you press a button and something automatically appears. So those are the things that I think we're going to see a lot of. One thing that we talk about information, there's a lot of really good information out there. And whatever people think about global warming, yes, there's support for that. But I would offer up a couple things. There's the Keeling Curve site, which is a partnership between UCSD and Scripps Institute of Oceanography.
How do you spell that?
Keeling and then curve. You can effectively look at what the CO2 levels, what all these atmospheric levels were the day you were born. But the chart goes off the hook when you move into since 2000, and even over the past 5 years. Another one, there's a scientist. I think she's a professor at Texas Tech. Her name is Catherine Hayhoe, Hayhoe. She does a series of global weirding videos. What I like about it is she's just got a really good style. The videos have animation in it to show what she's saying. She tackles things from all perspectives. So what's really happening in science, but also politics, religion. She even has a video about the fact that she's evangelical, and within the evangelical community questioning whether there's global warming. And, so these are the things that we again, it comes back to us as citizens. We have to put on ourselves to really dig deep and find stuff. And it's out there and it's available because of technology where it wasn't available before. And as much as Pence wants to, it's unfair to say as much as he wants to cut off information, whatever, who knows what the purpose is, but it's all out there, whether individuals want it or not. And I'm just excited that there are more foundations that are putting money into this. And if that's because of how fashionable it is because of people like Greta, I think that's all great. And we just have to keep on pushing as citizens to get this stuff to happen.
If I just finish up with, I think...
Yeah, take us home, Zoe.
Yeah, more companies understand a brand story. More companies understand that what they do is important, but how they do it is even more important. And that we as consumers are increasingly interested in that story, and that level of authenticity is something that we as individuals, the Gretas within us, can undoubtedly have an impact on. And so from that perspective, I'm with you, Mitch, it's an and, but for me it's another and. Formula One, whilst I don't enjoy it, it's something that brings more technology and more hope in terms of discovery. And without technology, we can't discover. We can't turn the clock back. I don't want to rediscover fire. We already have that. And if we take some of those things forward, understand that authenticity is key to creating a sustainable planet, then I think we have an incredible future ahead of us. So I'm going to say goodbye now from Vegas. Thank you.
Goodbye. Thanks again.
Thank you.